As Maria has perfectly explained, adopting digital fluency is one of the main challenges of the near future, and universities are also facing this challenge. Students and teachers are doing everything to find the right balance between safety measures and learning management. Masks and hand sanitizer are not only mandatory, but also part of the life on campus. With all this uncertainty and chaos, universities have to endure the digital transformation process. Thankfully, universities are resilient institutions. How many dangers have they faced throughout history? And here they are, after all. The coronavirus crisis is seen as a threat, but also as a booster for research and innovation. Only time will tell. Well, time and our next panel. But before we greet the speakers, let's welcome Cristina Manzano, Director of S Global and columnist at El País. Welcome, Cristina.
Thank you very much, Marta. Good afternoon, good morning if you are on the other side of the Atlantic, good evening. Thank you for being here, there at the other side of the screen, for this exceptional panel to tell us, Marta just explained, the challenges and opportunities for the future of higher education, especially here in Europe. We have with us today for this, to talk about these issues, we have Santiago Iñiguez, who's president of iUniversity. We have Martin Pol, who's the rector of the University of Maastricht. We had Edeltraud Harapi Egger, who's the rector of the University of Vienna Sciences and Business there in Austria. And we have Andrea Principe, who's the rector of Luis Guido Carli University in Rome. Marta explained very well all the different aspects of these challenges and opportunities, but I want to start from the very beginning. The first impact that the pandemic has had on higher education, on education in general, is that it has become totally virtual. And I wanted to start with Edeltraud. I wanted to ask you, do you think this is a permanent trend? Are we seeing now students going back to classes normally? Do you think it will stay forever? What is your opinion?
Oh, well, thank you very much. No, well, of course, we saw that it works to go virtual and to have all our lectures transformed to the digital format. So it did work, actually. But nevertheless, we can see that our students and even also our faculty members, they are a little bit exhausted from all those different online formats, online meetings. And now, since we started to invite them, at least partially again, back to campus, I can really see how happy they are to meet again, to have a kind of a social interaction, to get the feeling, to get the spirit of the university and the campus life, even with those regulations we have because of safety reasons. So since they are aware of the fact that they really missed a lot, this direct meeting and face-to-face meeting and debating, I don't think that we can on the long term actually exclude and finally substitute all those interactions by digital formats.
One of the main pillars of this new trend is the role of technology, of course. And we are hearing much and more about what it's called hybrid education, because as you well mentioned, many students want to go back to the classrooms, but suddenly we have the virus again. I wanted to ask Santiago how IE is facing this trend towards combining face-to-face and online education.
Well, we have been working for the past 20 years in hybrid formats, and thus we were able to jump when the pandemic was declared. We had here in Spain a state of alarm, so we were able to jump into hybrid formats on the spot without any sort of solution of continuity. But I agree very much with what the rector of Vienna University was saying before. Education is an embodied activity. We learn when we are small children, we start learning not just by listening and seeing things, but even by touching. So the senses and the use of the senses is vital for the learning process. That's why we have discovered that despite technology bridges the learning process and of course helps a lot in terms of personalizing the learning, we still need very much face-to-face, in-presence education. In fact, all the surveys that have been run across continents for undergraduate and postgraduate students reveal that they all miss being on campus and interacting in presence with their fellow students?
Many of those fellow students come from other countries, and international mobility has also been very much affected. Martin, again, do you think that this pandemic will change the way we have been perceiving, we have been living international mobility? Not only the pandemic, but also other trends like the new transatlantic relations or Brexit. Many students used to prefer the UK for their studies. Are they changing now more? Are they looking more towards continental Europe?
Yes, I think so. There is a change that we see, and I think it will last. I think the challenge now is how can we create international mobility in a virtual context. As you may know, I'm also responsible for European University Alliance, Youth for Young Universities for the Future of Europe. And we have spent a lot of efforts recently to have a virtual mobility, which means that students can follow courses online at 10 different European universities. So that is not a perfect replacement of going and experience a different culture, but you certainly also can follow what we call an international classroom. Then beyond Europe, I think the change will be more dramatic as any geopolitical change has been in the past, such as Brexit, the situation in the US that's unclear, situation in Asia. So I think that will change the student streams. I can only say from my university, we were surprised that we see 15% more students that inscribed at my university this year. Mostly from within Europe, not from outside Europe. There we see a small decrease.
Andrea, may I ask you, are you also seeing that trend? More students coming from within Europe than from other places that used to come before?
Yes, we've experienced the same pattern that Martin was mentioning. Although, against all odds, we did receive a very large number of applications from international students. As a matter of fact, we more than doubled the number of applications. So this means that there is, I think, a need which is now ingrained in the students' DNA and student minds that international mobility is part and parcel of the educational path. So although probably in the short term, we will experience somehow a reduction of mobility of students, which can be somehow substituted with what Martin was saying, using digital technologies. In the medium to the long term, we do expect that we are going to still rely upon international mobility, and again, as an important dimension of students' career paths.
Let me touch upon the economic factor, because the economic crisis is one of the most known effects of consequence of this pandemic. And I would like to ask you about both the impact for higher education institutions and for the students themselves. Let's start with the institutions. Edeltraud, how can universities face the decrease in tuition fees if students are not going back in as large numbers as before, for instance? Or how can universities face the development, the research needed, the investment in technology needed to face this virtual future? Do we have enough resources to be up to the level of the challenge?
Well, I think this is a kind of a political question. You know, I'm a rector of a public university, which means that I am not relying on tuition fees, because our understanding is that education is a public good, which is then funded by public money, by taxpayers' money. If you have an idea of, you know, that education is an investment in your own human capital, then of course it's more an idea of private good, where you have to invest in your own market market value. And then, of course, you are more on the side of tuition fees. What I can see now compared to my colleagues from those institutions who really rely on tuition fees, that they face severe financial problems on a long-term run as well. So I'm a little bit lucky. I'm a little the lucky guy, I guess. So I can see that even we have always the discussion on depending on political situations by being a public university, at the moment, this saves us from financial damages. However, what we will see is that probably more and more students can't afford an education, because it's not only about tuition fees, of course, it's only about, not contributing to family income, or also do have to work for their own economic reasons. Therefore, I think that one idea would be to go a little bit more to philanthropic culture, which is not very well developed in Europe. But basically, I think we should invest a little more in this area of the idea that people just support financially research and universities, and therefore higher education.
You are totally right. Even if you don't depend on tuition fees, the challenge is also for public finances when they are going to be much more stressed due to the crisis. Martin, do you think the plans that the European Commission, the European institutions are designing for the recovery plan and the next budget for the European Union, do you think that will be enough to cover that stress in our public finances regarding, again, higher education?
I mean, that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, I'm concerned that if the European Commission makes budget cuts, that higher education can be a victim. So I think we have to lobby for that. But on the positive side, there's also a lot of investment now. I was more concerned, I would say, if you asked me this question 4 to 6 weeks ago, but I see in many countries, also in my countries, the willingness to just invest to conquer the crisis. And I think that's what you also need at universities. But I would agree with my colleague from Vienna. In my country also, the universities are at the moment financially stable. What we have to worry about is the students. The economical situation is the students, the family where they come from. Will they still be able to afford to go to university? So that will be the challenge for the future. But in terms of my national funding, I am very optimistic in Europe. I hope we can convince Europe that investing in higher education in the higher education area is still an essential feature. But I'm really worried about the students and their families.
Andrea, regarding precisely students, what is your experience there in Rome? Are students dropping out because of economic problems? Are there enough financial support for them? Are they changing? Is a university college degree still the door to the social, the social ladder to step to another way of being in life? Is this still something that most people want to have now?
Well, I do think, and of course I'm biased in this respect, being the leader of a university, although it's a private university. I do think that students and in general university education, academic education, still represents the way to prepare the next generation of leaders, and therefore offer opportunities also to students that cannot afford. On the as a university, we have not experienced any drops, any number drops for students, but we do have offered to students, even students already enrolled at Lewis, grants to support them because of the economic crisis, which has not been particularly important as yet, but I do think that will kick in later on. So I think we should be aware of this, and I think we should also try to think about different other solutions. For instance, we have liaised with a few banks to offer loans. At the same time, we also liaise with companies to increase the number of grants and scholarship to students.
Thank you. One of the major things that we are seeing that that the pandemic has created is to increase the gap, the inequality gap in many aspects, but also in education. We have heard many stories of children in their homes which didn't have good internet access, for instance, which didn't have the equipment, the computers, and so on. At the university level, Santiago, how can universities keep assuring that that gap is not widening in the coming years? What is your experience from IE?
Well, sure. I mean, this is one of the major issues that we all talk about these days, accessibility to higher education on a universal basis. And linking, your question to previous comments, because education is a common good, which is provided by both public as well as private universities, but it's a costly activity. And what we find is that states and governments are dropping their investments in education across the board. This is happening in the US as elsewhere. We are also finding that there's some resistance to pay high tuition costs. So we need to gather the support of many different agents from public and private sources, including, of course, fundraising activities in order to finance our different activities and provide universal access to applicants and students. So I guess this is actually an issue which is applicable across the board. It doesn't just affect European countries. It's also present in the US, across the Americas, and increasingly in Asia. Of course, education can become an equalizer. It can actually provide the best possible access to climb up, as you were saying before, the social ladder. But unless you guarantee access to higher education, good scholarships, good loan schemes, and of course, many other sources in order to finance the activity at universities. And this is also linked to international mobility. Of course, moving all those students and faculty members and talent across countries, cross-border, does also entail costs. And the European Union has been, very supportive of the Erasmus program. But we will probably need to increase those funds in the future. So anyway, education is a common good that deserves lots of attention in order to gather enough funds to finance, this very important activity for the global society.
Let me go back to the very beginning, because we were talking about the impact of the pandemic in virtual teaching, how everyone has become suddenly virtual. But do students and do parents consider that virtual teaching has the same level than face-to-face teaching? And learning, of course, and what about the experience on campus? When we have to become, Edeltraud was saying before that many students want to go back. We are seeing students going back to campus, but there will be moments where it won't be possible. There will be institutions that will bet on virtual because of many reasons. How can we define a university college degree that is virtual without having the experience of the campus life experience, which was it is an essential part of higher education? I know you mentioned before that most of the students want to come back to campus, but what if? As I was asking at the very beginning, is this a permanent trend? Is this a temporary issue? What is your opinion, Martin?
Yes, I think the full-time virtual education is a temporary solution and temporary response to the acute phase of the pandemic, that if there's a lockdown, you have to go this way. If you can avoid that, I think the future is indeed the blended classroom, hybrid education. We have done a lot of interviews with staff and students, current ones and ones that apply, that they really want this mix. They want a mix of a campus experience with an online variant. So what we have decided to do here, and we have currently run our campus with 20-30% of the normal capacity due to the social distancing rules, that all the lectures are online. All, I would say, larger groups are online. But the small groups, the interaction, the social interactions, we organize those on campus. in my view, this is the model that we also will pursue in the future. I don't think a full-time digital virtual environment for the whole degree program is going to be viable to replace what we have done in the past.
And what about teaching? What about professors? How have they got used to this online teaching? Because students are young and by definition more resilient, but what about the faculty? And this is a common question. This goes for all of you. What has been your experience throughout these months with all these professors having to teach online if they were not used to? Who goes first? Maybe Edeltraud, please.
Well, yes, indeed. I had nice experiences with colleagues who would probably have said 1 year ago that there's no way to have any digital format in the class because this is just not thinkable. Now they would come back to me and would say, well, now since I had to go online, I learned a lot, and I can see that there are still parts I can also in a long-term run I could use for a better teaching concept. So I think that my faculty members did a good job. But nevertheless, what we saw is that they really need competences. It's not only about technological competences and how to use the tools, but it's also that they really had to redesign their concepts. So simply, switching your traditional teaching concept into the virtual world, this did not work. But in order, to have a high quality teaching performance, we really had to offer coaching, we had to offer workshops, we had to offer a different kind of further training of community learning from each other and so on. So I think that also teachers and faculty members, they experienced new ways of teaching and new ways of interacting with the students. However, what they also reported is that they really miss the interaction with the students. And may I add just one issue about the virtual world. What we can see is that it is much easier to switch to online formats in groups of students who know each other. So they have already some networks and they know each other. They had been in classes last academic year and so on. For those who come to the campus for the very, very first time, who have to, to get used to this huge organization, to find new friends, to find learning groups, these are those who really need also on-site events and space to get to know each other.
Andrea, how have you dealt with this with your professors, the professors in the Luis Guido University? How have they dealt with teaching online? Were they used to? How far had you gone before this pandemic to online teaching?
Well, I'm smiling because I like to say that we, due to the pandemics and due to the lockdown, each of us was somehow forced to attend a crash course into the future. And as a matter of fact, all our faculty at Luis, some of them were already very much into digital learning, but now the entire faculty has had a very interesting experience now to use digital technologies. And I think that despite the kind of gap that we had at the beginning, now we have filled it very well, to the extent that soon after the end of the summer term last academic year, we have organized a set of seminars for our faculty to tell them how to and teach them how to redesign the programs, the courses, to better exploit this hybrid model. As other universities in Europe, as we were listening, at Luis, we have adopted this hybrid model that offer more spaces, more logistics, more on-campus presence for the freshers, for the students of the first years, and overall for the other students is a 50-50 online vis-a-vis in presence classes. Because another thing that we've learned during the lockdown is that online teaching has great opportunities, and I do think that we need to take online teaching and digital technologies into account when we're going to be redesigning further on the programs and the courses. But we shouldn't forget that learning is a social process, and in fact, it's also a socializing process. So we do need to have in-presence lecture, in-presence interaction in order to make sure that learning does take place and can be augmented by digital technologies. So cannot be substituted for it, but can be augmented by digital technologies.
Santiago, AI has been a pioneer in online teaching. It has been there for 20 years. Where do you see the next wave of innovation in higher education and in higher education in general?
Well, if I can link, your question with the need of having our faculties adapted to this new environment, because many of the consequences of the COVID are here to stay in terms of how technology has become much more embedded in the learning process. So I guess that the major contribution of technology in the future will be the personalization of learning. Technology provides the opportunity to identify and potentiate all the skills from participants, from students. And if we prepare our professors, our faculty, in order to orchestrate this process in the best possible way, we can actually enhance the whole learning process. So this is actually what we are seeing now at IE University. Of course, it's very challenging because running hybrid formats demand from professors that they manage the platform and at the same time have an eye on those students who are attending in presence, but also take care of those who are attending on remote, and at the same time manage, the blackboard, the digital blackboard. So it's quite stressful. Already teaching, is stressful. If you add all those elements, it can be actually a very demanding task. So what is vital is that we actually train our faculty so that they can not just cope with the new challenges, but can make from these lots of opportunities the best possible experience, learning experience for participants. I guess that the major contribution of all this is the personalization of the learning process.
Let me turn the same question to Martin, please. What is your experience with the faculty? How have they reacted? And where do you see the next wave of innovation in higher education?
Yeah, well, I think we were all impressed, of course. We are a problem-based learning university. I would say we are very versed to deal with problems. We have adapted very fast, and we also had teams of more experienced users that taught the others. So that was not the issue. The thing that concerns us, and this has also been addressed by Santiago, the pressure, the additional work pressure that this online teaching can cause. So we have really to invest in additional help, new technology, faster internet connections, also emotional support. And then another point, a lot of our faculty is in home office, provide equipment for them that they can use in home to make the home office as efficient than they are on faculty. The future, in my view, is that we have to develop this virtual aspect even more and also add new technology. And then we can easily ask our students who are in a generation that's extremely creative. So we have experimented with new virtual formats, such as in the teaching process, such as hackathons to address certain issues that the students really love to do, or also gaming strategies to integrate in the process. What we have to do is move away from the idea of digital or virtual education in the sense we're doing it now, sitting across each other on a flat screen, to really find the creativity that a lot of these young people have and integrate it into the virtual aspect of our hybrid education system of the future.
Let me be a bit of a devil advocate here. Talking about Europe, where do you see the competition? especially considering that we are completely reliant on technology companies and technology corporations. The European Union is trying to fill the gap with not having technological champions, which are necessary to develop all these factors in higher education. Where do you see the competition in technology, in other countries? Is it in Asia? Is it in the United States still? Can we really be up to the level of the moment, of not now, of the future that is coming to us? Who wants to go first? Maybe Andrea, please.
Well, there's as we're saying, a kind of political question here. I don't think that Europe does have the potential to cope with the competition in higher education, but in general across industry, to sort of give a kind of more academic answer to the question. I would say that it depends very much on us. It depends very much on how we're going to be allocating the funds that the European Union is allocating to the different countries, and then it's down to the countries to make sure that investments are being made in infrastructure overall, but also digital infrastructure and human infrastructure. So again, higher education here, of course, I do underline all my bias. Human capital education is fundamental for the future of Europe. If we want again to exploit all our potential to be at the forefront of technology, industry in general, and higher education.
Precisely, because it's not only infrastructure or technology, it's also the skills, the skills that people will need to face that future. Edeltraud, what is your view on this?
Well, I agree to Andrea that it depends a little bit on the political situation in Europe and the willingness to invest further into higher education. But I think there is one big strength of Europe, namely, I would call it a kind of innovative capacity to the diversity we have. So given this European complex, which is, historically seen very much oriented towards enlightenment and those values, I think there is a real strength we could put forward, and we could try to figure some, to elaborate some niches and to come up with a very strong innovation network among different stakeholders, and to build up an innovation ecosystem, a European ecosystem. And there, of course, we could try to have good partners, different stakeholders, and so on and so on. Of course, we are in a global competition, so it's not, it would be naive to say, well, we can think about, a very local situation. We are competing all the time. We always have been competing with the rest of the world, but nevertheless, I think there is a chance of a specific European model of higher education, and of a value-driven society of solidarity based on education, and I would call this an informed participation or democratic systems. So yes, I think we are competing, but there is a very good opportunity to come up with a European model of higher education and a self-understanding of what it means to be part of an innovative ecosystem.
Martin, what would be for you that definition for a European model of higher education?
Well, I think, let me come just shortly back to the technology question. I think technology is not deciding the race. It is deciding the race, what's our value proposition. And indeed, and I say the modern university is an European invention. So I think we should build the future on our tradition, number one. Number two, the European University Alliance idea is a very good one. We need indeed, we all come from countries relatively small, somewhat bigger. If you put us on the map next to China or the US or even Canada, we are all small. But if we can pull this together, if we come with a strong value proposition of a European landscape, then I think we're going to be very competitive. It's more easily said than done. What we have to do in this context is overcome some of the still existing inequalities in the European higher education area. New member states, traditional universities, young universities, as the university that I am chairing, need to come together to do this. If we are smart, to pull our resources together, then we have a real chance to have a very unique proposal that is different from countries where free speech has less valued than here, that is different from countries where you are under extreme pressure or get easily rejected to get a visa, like we see now in some of our traditional partners in the US, then we can be very strong in this competition.
Santiago?
No, following on the previous comments, if I look at how the response from European universities has been in face of this crisis, the pandemics, I guess that overall it has been much more proactive and quick than the reaction on the side of American universities, which in many cases they just entered into a state of shock. I guess that our universities have been more prompt, quick. We have opened the campuses, we have installed the necessary health protocols, we have been in contact with the different stakeholders. So in my impression, I guess that we are probably closer to our students, to our customers, and to the rest of the stakeholders. But following on Sabine's comments, I guess that Europe provides a much more diverse environment, which can be attractive to many international students. Competition is becoming more multipolar, like happens in many other sectors of social activity. And we will see in the future, of course, many new Chinese large universities competing to attract talent. We saw in the past English-speaking countries from, of course, the US, UK, and Australia. But we will also see emerging countries also fighting for their own stake in the market. So the way we can actually provide an attractive offer for international applicants is by enhancing what is the best of Europe, our diversity, our history and traditions, the way we combine the humanities with this professional orientation of our degrees, and of course, many other things, our closeness to stakeholders, for example. So I guess that European universities have a very good opportunity to seize whatever happens after this COVID.
Thank you. We are reaching the end of our panel, but I wanted to introduce a controversy recently launched by Scott Galloway. He states that, or he thinks that there will be partnerships between higher education, very, very elite institutions like MIT and the like, and the big tech companies, and that will lead to a group and a very limited sort of institutions addressed to a very small elite, and the rest will be virtual and will be just left aside. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think about this? Because yes, we are seeing these partnerships between the technological companies and the universities, but is the future that dystopic? Martin, I see you nodding. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is very interesting. I think and I would maybe some people do that, and maybe there's going to be a group. But I think looking back at our European tradition, our strengths and our future must be that we are non-elitist. You know, the program of our alliance is we want to be excellent, we want to be not elitist, we want to be inclusive. If I look at the societal uproar that's seen in many countries, in France with the Yellow Jackets, in the US, in others, it's always about inequality. It's always about being the elite. I think that university need to reach out to society more than we have done, and we do this in Europe better than in many other countries. So, of course, there may be some MIT working together with some tech guys, fine, and they maybe cater to some elite group or so-called elite group of students, but this is not going to resolve the global problems that we have to face. I think in that aspect, you need broad universities that are providing excellent education, and most of all, next to this education, also provide a global citizenship training, academic responsibility to make sure that our graduates participate in the future of this continent and globally.
Who else wants to comment on this idea, Edeltraud?
Yeah, well, I agree with Martin. So I would say that, of course, this might be a trend and a tendency. So there is, and of course, we can see that more and more big data science companies are offering cooperations to universities, in particular to offer infrastructure and any kind of, data access and resources they need. And this might be good cooperation, so partnerships and so on. But I don't think that this. I think there will be a revival of the European idea of higher education, and as Martin said, it's not so we should not misunderstand that elite does not mean that we are not sticking to performance, that we're not sticking to high quality, but we probably are more on the side of inclusion and diversity considered as strength, and I'm pretty sure and completely convinced that this will on a long term pay off.
Thank you very much. We've reached the end of our time. It's been really interesting, very, very insightful. And I want to thank you because with all these debates about challenges and opportunities, I want to leave it here with the opportunities. You have all transmitted a positive future. We have the chance, the Erasmus program was mentioned before, has been the major producers of European citizens, of Europeanism. And with the potential that our universities have, I'm sure we will get there. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for being there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.